Hi, this is Dr. Emma Offord, host of This Voice is Mine, the Unquiet Podcast. For every neurodivergent mind that was masked, misread or missed, where identity is reclaimed and the system gets named, This Voice is Mine is a podcast for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too chaotic, too intense or not enough. Hosted by myself, Dr. Emma Offord, a clinical psychologist, neurodivergent woman and unapologetic system disruptor. This podcast explores what happens when difference is pathologized and what becomes possible when we drop the shame, the script and the medical model. Through stories, reflections and conversations with people who were never meant to fit, This Voice is Mine reclaims the truth of neurodivergent minds, bodies and ways of being. This is not about fixing or fitting in. It's about remembering who we are and unlearning everything they got wrong. Today I'm joined by Charis Halsall, a parenting coach, mother of 3, and host of the hugely popular podcast Parent Unplugged. Charis is an avid reader. She's devoured over 300 books on parenting and brings that depth of curiosity and care to everything she does. A passionate advocate for both children and adults with dyslexia, Charis turned her own lived experience into power after being told repeatedly that she couldn't read. She created a podcast that's now helping parents across the world navigate the realities of raising children. In Parent Unplugged, Charis speaks with leading experts on feeding, sleep and behavioural challenges, but always through a lens of honesty and compassion and real-life messiness. Our conversation was warm, funny and full of those Me Too moments, a powerful exploration of what it means to parent differently and with presence. We talked about breaking the rules of parenting, perfection, embracing imperfection, and raising both ourselves and our children with understanding. I think listeners will love Charis's openness, her humour, and the way she reminds us that even when it's hard, we're all learning and doing better than we think. Welcome, Charis. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast.
Oh, Emma, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me and congratulations on this new venture for you. It's very exciting.
It is really exciting and it really means so much to have you here. For those who don't know you, would you mind explaining a bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm Charis Halsall. I'm a mum of 3 little ones, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And I am the host of the Parent Unplugged podcast,
Yeah.
which is a podcast about supporting parents in their sort of growth journey of becoming parents. So I speak to experts and kind of bring tips to how we can use them as parents and try to bring the sort of science home in an everyday way for parents to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then prior to that, my career started out working with children with special needs. I worked in mainstream schools and I worked in residential care. And then I ran my own business where I sold resources for children with special needs for about 10 years before having my own kids.
Yeah, I knew that about working with special needs, but I didn't realise that you had your own business and all of that. So it's quite a hybrid career that you've had, but it sounds like it's connected in many ways.
Yeah, I feel like that. It's kind of, I guess, kind of neurodiversity has been the big theme throughout it, really.
So tell me a little bit more about, your first career. Tell me what it was like and working in special needs and the kind of work that you did at that time.
I really enjoyed it. And I think being dyslexic myself, it was something I could relate to. I felt like I was that child in school and I had that lived experience. Yeah. So even though I was working with children maybe with autism or Asperger's or a variety of different sort of neurodiverse traits, I just kind of understood that piece. So I think I really enjoyed the work in supporting and encouraging them in a school setting.
Yeah. And what were you doing with them? Like, how were you supporting them? How are you helping them?
So when I was in mainstream school, it was kind of in like a TA role.
Yeah.
And then when I was in residential care, the children was sort of quite severe with autism. So a lot of it was sometimes more general care rather than like in a learning environment.
Yes.
So more kind of helping them do day-to-day things and like a daily routine.
Yeah, so they're kind of daily activities of living, perhaps practical support, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of experience of neurodivergence and working with neurodivergent people. Being a neurodivergent person yourself, Did you see yourself going on that trajectory? Was that a kind of intention as you were building your career initially? Were you thinking, I want to work with neurodivergent?
Not at all, not at all. When I left school, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do.
Right.
And a friend offered me the role in the school. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds interesting. And I just really enjoyed it. And as I say, I think that's looking back because of my own journey that I really took to it, which is why I then went from there into residential care and then running my own business to support children with special needs.
Yeah.
But no, I certainly didn't set out to do it that way, for sure.
So it's almost, I often describe my career as like following breadcrumbs that got me here, as though it was always meant to be, in a way. So you've already kind of mentioned that you have a diagnosis of dyslexia.
Yeah.
Do you prefer dyslexia, dyslexic? Is there a particular term?
Either.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
When did you receive your dyslexic diagnosis?
So I was 7 when I got mine, which looking back, I was quite lucky to have got that diagnosis because that was sort of 30 odd years ago now to have got that diagnosis. I was lucky. And it did help. It did support me through school because obviously it did raise some awareness and it was able to help my parents understand a bit about the challenges that I had.
Yeah.
But looking back, I think 30 years ago, we didn't know half of what we know now. So the expectation was still very different than what we would expect with a dyslexic child now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was certainly helpful. But I would also say it was helpful depending on the teacher. Some teachers throughout my school experience really wanted to understand and really wanted to kind of support that.
Yeah.
And others you could tell didn't have any understanding or knowledge of that. And they were a lot less empathetic and sort of compassionate to perhaps what I was going through. And unfortunately, at times did make the experience a lot more challenging than it necessarily needed to be.
Are you able to share some of what those challenges
Absolutely.
were?
So I know you've sort of mentioned before about sometimes how dyslexia can be like small traumas. And it was when I first discovered that word, I was speaking to Dr. Alison McClymont on one of the podcasts that I did. And it really got me reflecting on my own childhood because I'd always thought I wasn't someone that really experienced trauma growing up. But looking back, I think when we think of mini traumas, I think it's really common for someone with dyslexia to encounter lots of these mini micro traumas along their entire education that do compound. And I think there's one in particular that sticks in mind. I must have been about 13 when I was at secondary school. And I was told that I could use a laptop. And this was a big thing back then because, you know, laptops were still relatively new. So to bring one into school and be able to do my work on that was amazing. So the teachers were quite excited for me. And this one particular teacher who had always been so supportive, my geography teacher, and she was amazing. But she turned and she said to me, look, Charis, now you're going to be doing your work on a laptop. You're going to be graded completely equal because there's no difference now. Things are going to be the same for you as they are for everybody else because you've got the support that you need. Well, I was 13. I was none the wiser. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I instantly realised nobody had taught me to touch type.
Yeah.
So I instantly went from being slow to even slower.
Right.
Spell checks weren't what they are now back then. And people don't always know, but when you're dyslexic, like if you can't get the first sound of a word, a spell check won't pick it up. The same as there's lots of words like there. Well, there's 2 ways of spelling it. I'll still always put the wrong one. And again, things are a lot more sophisticated now that we have things that will check our grammar, and with AI, I know we're massively advancing, but we're talking 30 years ago. None of that existed. So I went from getting, you know, a sort of paper mark to 80% down to 20% and handed back to me completely covered in red pen. And I was mortified. And what hurt the most was the look on her face that I had made no effort.
Right.
And I was so frustrated because I was trying to figure out this laptop and how to work and how to do all of this stuff that I didn't really have any support with because nobody else was working in this way. So after a couple of months of working like this and kind of experiencing this across the board with many teachers, I handed the laptop back and said, I'm not going to do it like this anymore. It's not working for me.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I didn't get a great response. The response was, well, if you don't want to try, if you're not prepared to put in the effort. And it was horrible because I think the moment that sits with me is I do remember the shame that I felt and the embarrassment that I felt, that I've been given this opportunity and I didn't take it.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me? Why didn't I take it? Why couldn't I make it work?
Yeah.
But looking back and reflecting now through adult eyes, I recognise all of these things that, you know, spell checks weren't up to scratch, the grammar, the ability to not touch type. There's no way I could have succeeded in that situation.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily blaming the teachers. They didn't understand anymore. Unfortunately, that is the problem, though. There was just a huge lack of awareness and understanding.
Yeah. And there still is. Although things have progressed, there still is. And I see that all the time. But hearing your story, what really resonates with me and what I still see quite a lot of is this assumption. We provided you with a tool, not necessarily thought about evaluating or seeing how the child gets on with it, or, you know, if it's the right tool and do you need some support alongside that tool, and does it actually kind of create an equality, or, you know, making that assumption. So all that responsibility, you know, we provided you with the laptop, and then the responsibility is handed right back to you to keep up in that mainstream way. And then, you know, following on from that, you trying your hardest, being disadvantaged almost at this point by your accommodation and the response that you're getting from more powerful people who are trying to do their best but are misunderstanding and perhaps invalidating your experience. And, you know, I think it's incredible that you handed it back, but you shouldn't have had to at the same time. But, you know, good for you for saying, you know what, this isn't working out for me. I love that. I really love that. But it gave you, it left you with feelings of shame and maybe that you hadn't made the most of, that you should have done better or could have done better, that kind of narrative maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're so right. I think we need to be assessing as we go along, because every child is unique and the circumstances of what's going to work for them is unique. Yeah. And I think that wasn't assessed in that situation, you know, and unfortunately, as I say, lots of teachers back then just didn't have that awareness. You know, I can think of other teachers as to numerous times when I would be asked a question in front of the whole class, and it was that fear that you would freeze, and I wasn't even trying to think of the answer because I was just frozen. And they would wait, and everyone would be silent, and they would wait, and I would dread that lesson every time. And I think if only we could have that understanding that that's not how children learn. That's not creating an environment where they're receptive and they're going to be intaking information. I was going into fight or flight, and I was too scared. I was literally frozen for my survival in some ways, of the embarrassment in front of my peers, of not knowing the answer, not knowing how to handle the situation, rather than ever thinking about what I was learning.
And these are the traumas, the relational traumas, the environmental traumas, and what I call neurodivergent specific traumas, that on the surface, this is an expectation. This is the way you learn. Everyone else can do it, or certain people can do it and do it well. So it's down to you again to find a way to do that, rather than the system around you finding a way to help you express yourself, maybe in a different way, or answer a question in a different way. It doesn't have to be standing up. You don't have to be neurodivergent to stand up and feel anxious, but it certainly adds to it.
Absolutely.
And then I think, like you said, you were dreading that particular lesson where that might happen again. It's that anticipatory anxiety building up. And so you have that snowball effect where you have the memory of when it went really wrong for you. You have the eyes on you, you have the comments, you probably have the report card that says needs to try harder, it's too quiet, or something like that. So all of that builds up, and it doesn't support or facilitate your voice.
No.
Does it?
Because then we start to have this internal voice that tells us that you're not good in these situations. You never know what to say. You never have the answer. And that was my internal dialogue throughout school. It was kind of fear-based. It was the fact that I didn't know. And that's how I really remember school, was spending so much of my time not really understanding what was going on, never understanding the question, but feeling too scared to ask because people got frustrated with me if I still didn't get it. And again, being an adult, I've learned that dyslexic people, dyslexic children, we just process the information differently. So just because you've explained it to me 2, 3, 4 times, if you keep explaining it in the same way, I'm still not going to get it.
Yeah.
We need to think of another way to maybe try and get the information through to me, something that resonates with the way that my brain thinks.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, lots of teachers will say, but I've taken the time to tell you again. And then by the second or third time, I couldn't possibly sit there and say, well, I still don't get it.
Yeah.
You know, so you'd end up kind of masking and saying, okay, I get it. And sitting there feeling even worse because now, again, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it when everybody else can? And just feeling really, really isolated and a bit alone.
So even with the diagnosis, so, you know, that to some degree your experience is in part validated by, okay, this is a thing, this is how your brain works, it works differently, therefore needs, you know, different kinds of ways of learning. Clearly that's not enough, is it? No. Because I also really believe in this and see this so much where people will receive a diagnosis and then that's it. There might be some accommodations, there might not, but it's almost as if it's then down to them to sort this out. But actually systemic change is what you're speaking of and what I also believe in, that those around a child, around an adult, need to be able to understand what you need rather than repeating the same thing that's failing that person
absolutely
over and over again.
And I think that environment matters so much. And unfortunately, at the minute, the whole education system is just not an environment that's built for neurodiverse brains.
No.
And that is where those micro traumas come in, because it's one thing if you get a diagnosis, but you do need those daily adjustments. And it doesn't always have to be huge. I'm going through this with my son now. He's 8 and he's been diagnosed. And I called it probably back when he was in reception. I was adamant. I was like, he's got dyslexia. I can see all the traits. I see me in him.
Yeah.
But obviously we can't diagnose until the ages of about 8 because obviously there's a lot of written text and things in the diagnosis. So that's fine. So we kind of waited and supported him as best as we could until we got the diagnosis. But it's little things like I went into the school for parents' evening last week and they showed me his maths book and all his workings out. But the first thing as a dyslexic person I saw on that maths book was the bright blue lines.
Yeah.
They were really glaring at me and I couldn't track his workings out because I was like, this is so unpleasant on the eye.
Yeah.
And it's little tweaks like that, like changing. I spoke to the school and we've changed it so he now has a book with grey squares.
Yeah.
And it makes all the difference because it's so much easier for him to track his own work and to look at the book. Yeah. And I understand you're not necessarily going to know that if you're not dyslexic, but these small tweaks make a massive difference.
They do.
To how well a dyslexic child can work on a daily basis and how they can kind of function in that environment.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, brilliant, by the way. So glad you did that and were able to speak to the school, you know, through your own personal experience and education. But even so, you know, that can still be hard. Having been through that kind of school trauma yourself, to then witness your son going through versions of it, maybe even reliving it to some degree yourself, seeing, you know, some of the problems and the barriers to his education. You know, finding your voice, I think, is incredible, and just curious about how you're able to do that. Maybe given the weight of like what you've already been through yourself.
So you're so right. It's very triggering for me. And I often say that to my husband, am I sort of being rational in this moment or over emotional because of my own triggers and how it's affected me? So I do get emotional on his behalf when it's things I see him struggle with. But then I think there's another really amazing piece that comes from being part of a neuro-affirming family. Yeah. Is you just get it. You get each other in a way that others don't necessarily understand. And because I had that lived experience, when he's been learning to read and his reluctance to read, he will throw himself over the desk. He lolls this way. He'll pick up anything he can to distract himself. Yeah. So it's very frustrating when you're trying to help him read because you feel like he's not paying any attention. He's got no interest. And it's hard not to be like, for goodness sake, just pay attention so we can get it done. Yeah. But having been on the other side, I know that procrastination is reluctance because he doesn't enjoy it. Why doesn't he enjoy it? Because he doesn't get it. He struggles with it and therefore he doesn't want to do it. Yeah. So it helps me keep that perspective in mind that he's not necessarily you know, being a problem, he's having a problem.
Exactly.
And to reframe that in my own head, to stay more compassionate to what he's going through and offer up the support that he actually needs, which is that we only ever read 2 or 3 pages at a time. Yeah. That's our reading done. We don't aim for 10 or 15 pages.
Yeah.
I try not to compare to other children because he's on his own journey.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
as long as he is making progress, that's what matters.
Yeah.
You know, his progress will always be behind because he's dyslexic.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the other things that I would say is a real message for schools and parents going through the system. I feel, in my experience, schools are very quick to sometimes be like, we're trying to catch them up.
Yeah.
So we're going to give them extra of the work that they find really hard so that we catch them up. But what they forget to take into consideration is that children who are dyslexic are more tired because it's exhausting, the overload of doing work that they find hard daily.
Yeah.
So already they're naturally more tired and therefore you're going to get a more emotional reaction. So is it always right to now give them even more of the work that they find challenging? And I also think sometimes we have to recognise, like, take my son, for example, he's in year 3 and his phonics are currently at reception level. So I said to them with his spellings, would you give a reception child year 3 spellings? And they're like, well, no, don't be ridiculous. I was like, okay, so why give them to my son?
Yeah.
Because if we know that's where he's level at, he's coming home with 2 out of 10. It's degrading. It makes him feel useless and he feels like he can't spell. We're feeding that narrative to him.
Absolutely.
I don't want him to believe that. I don't want that to be his internal chatter. I want him to believe that he can do spellings because he can, but at his own rate, at his own level. So let's give him 5 reception spellings. We also added a visual because it helps him remember the word. And now he gets 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. It's not that I don't want to stretch him. I just don't want to overwhelm him.
Absolutely.
And I think recognising that he might always track that 3 years below. As long as he's progressing, that's okay. Whereas, as I said, many schools or people are always looking to catch up. And I think we need to just stop trying to catch them up and work at their level. And I think, taking again my own experience on that, I remember being at secondary school and being reassessed for my A-levels. So that would have put me at, 16, 17? And my reading age was 12. But I have since gone on to read hundreds of books.
You have.
But I was told for a long, long time that reading's not my thing. You have a very low reading age. But if I wasn't compared against other people and I was just compared against my own abilities, I think it would keep self-esteem and self-worth a lot higher, and we wouldn't end up building up these limiting beliefs that then hold us back in later on in life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that about your family, about your experience. And I've got 100,000 questions off the base of that. Let me try and capture at least one. I loved what you said about neuro-affirming family. That is something that I just think is such a safe approach to parenting, especially when you have children with different needs in a learning environment or in any environment. And we'd love to have a neuro-affirming school and a more neuro-affirming society, and that's what many of us are working towards. But what you really talk about there, and what I'm really hearing, is reducing the trauma, reducing that internal narrative of shame, reducing the embarrassment and all of those negative emotions by understanding your son and what he needs and at what pace and what is going to keep him feeling safe, supported and seen, so that he can learn. Because we know this, if a child is anxious or in a place of shame, they don't have the blood supply to their brain in the same way. They are more concerned about the threat of being told off or getting it right or something else that's going through their mind at the time. They cannot take in that information. They scientifically, biologically cannot process that information. No. So it's quite actually a simple understanding if you just take it back to those basic scientific facts about biology. Isn't it?
And exactly that. And I think we do need to raise awareness of exactly that a child cannot learn, a human cannot learn or take on information when they're in a fight or flight state. And they will always put their survival, if they feel threatened in any way, above anything else, because that is biology and that is the science of how the brain works. So that's not a choice. So it's our job as the adult or the educator to really make sure that they are in a place of calm and feeling receptive to learning, so that they can access the curriculum in the way that all of the atypical children can.
And that takes me back to how you described your experience where, you know, you were sensing threat as in, this isn't working out with the laptop, you know, I'm still getting told off, I'm expected. You know, that is a threat. An expectation can be a threat when you're not quite sure how to meet that expectation, or you simply can't under those circumstances. But it silenced you at some point, didn't it?
Yes.
And you were saying you couldn't keep asking again for how to do this or to be explained in the same way. And so you masked, and that's still a survival response. So that quiet child who's no longer asking and not obviously struggling in maybe the classroom environment, they are still in that fight, flight, freeze, fawning response. And that's, I think, often the missed child, or because it's not easy to see, easy to identify. You know, you might be the well-behaved child, the one that, you know, maybe the teachers are grateful for because there's no disruption, then they can just carry on with their lesson. But that doesn't mean that you're learning.
No. And I think we know more than ever now the importance of building resilience in children. I feel like in my work all the time I hear this word resilience. You must hear that too. So you kind of have to ask yourself the question, how do we build resilience in children? And one of the key components in that is understanding that it's okay to get things wrong.
Yes.
It's okay to fail. Yes. And unfortunately, many of these experiences aren't promoting that message. They're promoting the exact opposite, that you've got it wrong and that's wrong. Rather than, what can we learn from this? Rather than, take my laptop story, if the teachers had sat with me and said, why are you handing it back? What's not working here? We could have discussed the fact that I couldn't touch type. We could have looked into getting a course for touch typing. We could have looked at the fact that I was explaining that it wasn't picking up the two theirs, the different ways of spelling. Maybe the teachers could have then taken that into consideration with marking, rather than it kind of being a black and white experience. If we had been more curious and more open-minded to what was going on, there was definitely learning opportunity for all of us in that, rather than just feeling like it was a failed experience.
That's something I see all the time. And when I go into systems like schools or, you know, different kind of environments, to help with understanding a child, you know, it's very, very often I will ask the question, have you asked them why? And most of the time that hasn't crossed people's minds. Not because they're not good people or they don't care, but there's something about how our systems are built, especially in school, that doesn't lead people's minds necessarily to ask this very basic question that could provide so many answers and put everybody at ease, because I think everyone's trying to find a solution a lot of the time. And so solutions are pushed and pushed and pushed, even when they're not the right ones, or they're not adapted when they could be, because people get into this very binary, it's working or it's not. You've got your accommodation, it should now change things. But often there's a lot more nuance and there's a lot more flexibility and complexity for somebody, isn't there? For example, not only did you have the laptop, but you also still had all of the impact that had been leading up to you giving you the impact to work through. Still. And then maybe you were still being asked to stand up as well. So that was still going on.
Absolutely.
In and around this one laptop that is not the one solution.
Absolutely. And you're so right there, because that narrative does then stick with you and it's hard to shake. And I have found that my entire life, that narrative of being dyslexic has been hard to shake, because in my head, there are certain things I'm just not good at. I'm just not as skilled at. And there is an element of truth to that. It's not my skill set. That's why I kind of have that diagnosis. But it doesn't mean that we can't be more adaptive and find other ways, especially in the world, the way things are changing now with AI coming through and jobs changing. Creativity, creative thinking, these skills that people with dyslexia possess are going to be some of the most sought after skills in the working world that we've ever wanted. So I think kind of raising that awareness and helping these children recognise that they do have so much to offer. It's just, unfortunately, because they're stuck in the schooling system, they're not seeing that. And it's only when they leave that environment and the environment changes that their self-worth is going to start to pick up, and they're going to realise that actually they do have some value that they can add to the working world. Yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And, you know, I was also then thinking, so your journey was one of feeling this shame, feeling this anxiety in the school environment, your voice being to some degree held back by the experience. And yet you're someone who has grown and grown and grown and found a voice and gives others a voice. And I'd just love to know a bit more about how, from leaving school, you were able to kind of begin to work through a lot of that school trauma and the internal narrative to go and help and support others.
Yeah. So I guess it didn't happen until I left school. I always felt quite stuck in the school system and I didn't enjoy it. And then it was only when I left school and I started working that I realised that I did have other qualities to bring to the table. I was quite pragmatic. I was a real doer. I'm really enthusiastic and quite creative with my ideas. And people enjoyed that. People enjoyed working with me for that. And it was the first time in my life that I felt valued. I felt like a valued member of the team, that people wanted to work with me. And that was the first time that I think my confidence actually started to grow. And then working alongside my dad when I set up my business, because looking back, my dad is such a great story of someone with dyslexia. He wasn't diagnosed, he's in his 70s now. And I think he's overcome so much adversity in his life. He was diagnosed with Crohn's when he was young. His dad died when he was 7, and obviously the dyslexia piece. But he never let any of that phase him. He kind of took it all in his stride, and he's got this great disposition. And he kind of taught me some of the skills in life that I still live by today, which is to, never take no for an answer, because someone will always have the answer. And it was that resilience in him, watching that resilience in him, which I think really got into my subconscious and really helped me recognise that, okay, grades aren't everything. I'm never going to be this high scoring grade child. I was heavily discouraged from doing a degree because of that. But there are other avenues and other ways to succeed. And I think when you've got someone to model that behaviour to you, to model that experience, it really can make such a huge difference to your own self-worth.
Yeah, it really, really does. And, that he sounds like he was neuro-affirming without using the word and maybe knowing the concept at the time. And so there's so much safety in that. And he could show you that there are divergent routes. There are different ways. And against the odds, against, barriers that society puts in front of us, not necessarily because of our brains. Yes, our brains might work differently. And under those circumstances, it's a challenge to complete something or do something. Change that environment, be given the neuro-affirming support, and actually a lot of thriving can happen. And at the same time, it doesn't have to meet society expectations. We don't all follow the same path. We don't all, cannot compare ourselves to everybody the same age and follow exactly the same trajectory. We might all go in very different directions. Equally worthy, equally needed in society, should be equally valued, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and exactly that. And having that neuro-affirming family, I think, again, that's where that's so important. Or even if it's not a family member, if you can find somebody else, as in, I don't know, I look for my son, what would I want for him? And I think, doing more sporting groups because he's more sporty, finding ways to be more creative so that he's around more like-minded people. And therefore, naturally, he'll probably come across somebody else who has dyslexia or some other neurodiverse traits that then he feels more at home, he feels more comfortable in the world because there are people like him around him, rather than just being in an environment where people are studying really hard and doing exams and asking him to conform in a way that just doesn't suit him.
And this is what I am so delighted about the neurodiversity movement and the raising of awareness of neurodivergence and people like yourself coming to share their experiences, because this helps people. This raises voices around diversity and difference. And maybe you don't have it in your family. Maybe you don't have a neuro-affirming family. Maybe you don't have a neuro-affirming school or teacher. Maybe you don't get your diagnosis. But if this is something that is more readily available and out there, and like you say, if you're involved in sports or somewhere else and someone else educates you on some form of neurodivergence that you can identify and relate to, I really think it's changing mindsets. It's changing how we respond to people. And we're realising we need more diversity. Yeah.
Absolutely, because we do need all brain types, you know, because all brain types offer different skills, and we need people who can follow through and get doctors and have those skills. But we also need people that can be creative, that can develop things like iPhones. And I think sometimes recognizing some of the people that have achieved in that way, like Richard Branson and Steve Dobbs, who've had neurodiversity, it really helps the younger generation to recognise that it doesn't have to stand in your way, that there are so many other routes that you can take. So I think, again, for me, that just comes down to one of the big things I try to do as a parent of a dyslexic child in the current schooling system is to really work with the school to keep his self-esteem high.
Absolutely.
That's my main objective. I don't worry about his his grades, because to me they're not an accurate representation of his intelligence or capability level. They're merely a measure of whether he's good at the art of schooling or not. So in our household, we focus on whether he's enjoying it, whether he's happy, whether he's progressing, and, you know, what we can do to support his self-esteem. And if that means we reduce the spellings down, we give him tools to use. So he now uses voice to text. And actually, that was another thing that came out of Parents' Evening the other day, actually, which was amazing. He had the previous week, written an essay, and it was short, very hard to read, very hard to understand, not a lot of ideas in it. The following week, when he'd been set up with his laptop and given voice to text, it was about 3 times the length. And the level of detail in his descriptions blew me away. He was saying things, you know, like the man had itchy knees, that, you know, just so many descriptive words that, to be honest, I didn't even know that he could think like that. And it made me realise how much he had been sort of closed down before, because he hadn't had the opportunity to express the full range of ideas that were in his head, because he was having to slowly write it down. And he always complains about not having enough time, never getting to finish a piece of work. So that really opened up the door for him. And I thought that was really quite amazing to see, actually.
I think this is, you know, really fundamental, that voices are quietened down, abilities are put in a box, and they aren't flourishing in ways that they could. And when you do allow more neurodivergent expression through accommodations, through neuro-affirming approaches, then you do see this flourishing. You do see, and I loved what you said. It's not about the academic achievement or attainment. It is about helping him keep his self-esteem and his, you know, well-being intact. And that is also what's going to help him flourish now and in development. He's in development, you know, and not all of us receive that in our development, and that has a long-standing impact on our nervous system and on our relational, you know, experiences. So it's incredible that you can, you know, in a kind of post-traumatic growth way, bring this to your home. But not only to your home, you brought it to your work, and you're now expanding further and growing even, you know, fuller size in terms of expressing yourself into your podcast, which is just flourishing. And it's just such a great podcast, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, thank you.
What's it like for you to kind of, I don't know, like see your voice growing in these ways?
It's a bit surreal sometimes. I still kind of pinch myself, because I feel such a privilege to get to sit with such amazing women that have specialised in their fields with what they do, and to kind of hold the conversations that we hold. And I guess I do still have limiting beliefs myself, and imposter syndrome, definitely at times. You know, I still never got a degree, and that still weighs heavy with me because of my own conditioning through the schooling system, because you go through school, if you get a degree, that means you're smart, right? So to have not taken that route when I'm sitting with so many people that are educated in that way is something I still have to remind myself that there are other ways. But the way I look at it was, because I did actually look at maybe going to do a psychology degree, because that's what I'd wanted to do years ago at school, when they said to me, look, you'll never get 3 A's. We're only going to let you do 2 A levels, and art will be one of them, because that's what you're good at. So it's just not going to be for you. So it was completely quashed, the thought of ever doing psychology. And I've loved psychology all my life. I find human behaviour, the way people think, why we do what we do, it fascinates me, and I could spend all day every day thinking about it and talking about it. So I have thought about doing a psychology degree, but then the thought of going back into the education system is like a bodily response. And I already feel like if somebody puts a textbook under my nose, there's just no way I'm going to look at that. Whereas if it's a book of my choice, I'm far more willing to read it. So in some respects, how the podcast came about was through reading lots of books and looking at doing a degree where I thought, I'm going to spend 3 or 4 years doing a degree. The average degree in the UK costs sort of £30,000 to £40,000.
Yeah.
Or I could take my own dyslexic approach on it, which is set up a podcast where I can sit with all these people who've written these books, who know all this information, and I can learn through doing it. Because that way I retain the information as well. Because I'm out there living it. It feels real. It creates an emotional response in me, which means I retain the information so much better. When I'm learning in theory, as much as I read it, it just doesn't go in. So for me, my podcast is my degree to myself, the degree that I never got all those years ago.
I absolutely love that. And I love how you've outsmarted the system. It's like, well, I'm not going in this direction. I'm going to go this way and get to where I want to be in the way that is more joyful to you, is more relevant to you, where you can learn. And I'm very similar to you. I've managed to do some academic text, but I have to have pictures. I have to have personal stories. So I have to meet people in those situations. I can't just read about something. It's too abstract for me. It's not relatable. I have to have colours everywhere. I have to stand on my head or something. There has to be stuff going on like that. So also, in a different way, a hard environment. But I love how you've brought this collective together of all these voices for others, because people are listening to this podcast and are really absorbing, all this wonderful knowledge. But you've done it for you as well, haven't you?
Absolutely.
And proven those people wrong who were suggesting that this wasn't, a way for you. Well, okay, I'll find my own way then. And you've done that. I think that's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely been a massive piece to my story and something that I wanted to do for me. I think having kids really changed how I thought about everything. I think they change us, don't they, in ways we didn't realise. And I think one of the big things I learned was actually where I thought I was going to change their behaviour, I realised that actually I needed to change my own. And I really needed to model the behaviour I wanted to see in them in more ways than one. And that's really what got me on this journey, was wanting to understand them better, understanding how I could help them, understanding how I could advocate for them. And that's what led me into reading, really. And it was a couple of years ago, actually, I went to a Tony Robbins conference. I don't know if you know him. He's the American sort of motivational speaker. And he came to England. And it was quite remarkable, actually, because he spoke about reading about 700 books in 7 years. And I remember thinking, that's amazing. Like, wouldn't we all love to have a tenth of Tony Robbins' knowledge and to be able to speak that competently? And to maybe one day offer my children the advice they need, rather than feeling like, I just don't know. I don't know how to respond, So I decided, imagine if I could read that many books. Imagine if I could read 100 books in a year. So I decided to set myself the challenge that I was going to read 100 books in a year. And I think I drove everyone mad, because that entire year I wouldn't watch TV on a weekend with my husband. It used to drive him mad. If I was in a queue somewhere, I was reading a book. When I was holding my kids' hands for them to go to sleep at night, I was reading a book. I was just reading a book all the time, because still, contrary to what lots of people would think, having read so many books, is I'm still an incredibly slow reader. And I will often read the same paragraph twice and the same book twice. So it took a lot of effort. And obviously I had to really break through that limiting belief that I'm dyslexic and therefore I don't read. But it was one of the best things I've ever done. And I think by the end of that year, I'd read 103 books. And I've never felt prouder of myself for the effort that I put in and for what I learnt. And it was one of the most remarkable years of my life, because it just changed how I thought about everything. Because reading those books challenged so many of my thought processes and things that I had just grown up believing. And it taught me to be more curious, be more open-minded, and that there are so many more perspectives out there. And then I loved what I'd learnt from the books so much that I didn't want to stop reading. So I sort of continued to read in subsequent years, just not to the same level. And I really felt like then I wanted to pass that on to the kids. And I guess what I didn't realise in doing that as well was what I was actually modelling to them through the behaviour, was that I was showing Harry that I had dyslexia, but I could still read books. I was showing that I had the resilience to show up for something that I'd set out for myself to do. And then that's when I kind of really realised the importance of modelling the behaviour. So I guess I kind of have this vision on who I would like to be one day. And so doing the podcast is my journey to getting myself there. Reading the books is my journey to getting myself there. And that is really to benefit myself, and because that's the best way that I can give my children what they need.
That is so inspirational and just delightful to hear. And, you know, what I also love about that is you read in your own way.
Yeah.
You know, and you didn't stop because you might have had to reread a paragraph, or that you were doing it while holding your child's hand while they're trying to sleep, like squeezing it in when you can and stuff like that. And you making it work in the way that you needed to. And it feels almost like a private little project that we've just been invited into, that you created for yourself in your way. Yes, there was an influence of Tony Robbins, but you did it your way. And, you know, I think that's what's also so inspirational, not just the achievement, but how you found your way to do that, and how you're doing that in your podcast as well, and how that also comes kind of full circle back to school and some of the self-limiting beliefs imposed on you that you are shattering in, you know, how you're doing this outsmarting of those limiting beliefs that you were exposed to.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, like, where we sort of started on the podcast, that's why, you know, the dyslexic piece, it does affect your whole life, you know? And I guess I would kind of say that to anyone who's raising a dyslexic child, is that it doesn't have to kind of dictate the path you're going to take. You're going to have challenges in the education system, but there are so many other routes when you finally break free of that. So that's why, if we can keep self-esteem and self-worth high in that moment in time when they are challenged, then there's no reason that they can't do whatever they want in the working world. You just might have to be a bit more creative at finding your own way to do it.
Absolutely. And when you can do that for your child, you are creating that. When you're preserving the self-esteem, you are creating that protective bubble around them in a system that is imperfect, that can adapt to some degree, but may never entirely provide the right learning environment. So preserving that self-esteem is all important.
Absolutely.
Charis, it's been amazing talking with you. Before we let you go, for those people out there, those listeners who are really interested in the people who come on this podcast, who are raising voices, maybe marginalised, maybe quiet voices that didn't get expression when they were younger. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to them?
I guess I would just say that there's nothing wrong with your brain. Your brain is fine just the way that it is. It's the system and the environment that you're in. So look to change that as best as you can, and know that when you do get out into the working world, there are so many paths and ways that you can make it work for you. And if one of them says no, just find another way, because it's out there. Yeah, absolutely. That's lovely. Thank you so much for coming on. Oh, well, thank you for having me. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to kind of sit here and discuss this, a topic that's obviously so close to my heart. So I feel like I could talk about sort of dyslexia and how it's affected my upbringing all day long. So yeah, thank you for having me. I think we'd sit here and listen to you all day long. You've been so generous with your personal stories. So thank you very much. Thank you.